There's just so much information flying around these days, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. It's easy to feel buried.
Especially when it comes to these really big, critical global issues. You're just constantly wading through data.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, how do you actually cut through all that noise? How do you get, truly well-informed without getting completely overwhelmed?
It's a real challenge.
Well, that's pretty much why we created the deep dive. It's meant to be your shortcut,
Yeah, a way to pull out the really important stuff.
Exactly. Extracting those key nuggets of knowledge and insight. And today, we're diving deep into something fascinating and, frankly, crucial.
Okay, what do we got?
The world of international environmental conventions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Important stuff.
Definitely. And these aren't just like dry, dusty documents somewhere. They're literally the framework shaping our planet's future. The air we breathe, the water, all of it.
Right. They have real-world consequences.
For sure. Our source material for this is a pretty comprehensive document covering these international organizations and conventions.
Got it.
So our mission today is basically to unpack these agreements, understand, how they came about, how they've evolved.
And what impact they actually have on our shared environment.
Precisely.
And I think you'll find the scope is actually pretty surprising. It's more interconnected than you might first think.
Yeah.
We're talking everything from these huge global blueprints down to really specific agreements.
Like protecting endangered species.
Exactly. Or managing hazardous waste when it crosses borders, all sorts of things. Setting the stage. Why global environmental conventions?
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. Why do we even need these international conventions for the environment? Couldn't each country just, handle its own patch?
That's a really fundamental question.
Yeah.
And the simple answer is, well, no, not really.
Because
environmental problems just don't care about national borders, right?
Yeah.
Pollution drifts, rivers flow through multiple countries, migratory species travel.
And climate change is obviously global.
Exactly. So these conventions provide this critical framework. It's partly for national action, but maybe even more importantly for international cooperation.
Ah, okay. So it's about getting everyone on the same page.
Pretty much. Creating a shared language, a set of common commitments for all these different countries to work together on problems that are truly global.
Makes sense.
And they cover huge areas, nature conservation, handling hazardous materials, land use, the marine environment, the atmosphere. It's broad.
So it's this collective approach then, because one country can't solve it alone.
Absolutely essential. No single nation has a hope of tackling these things in isolation. 2, the landmark beginning. The Rio Earth Summit and its enduring legacy.
All right, if we're talking beginnings, there's one event that really stands out, doesn't it? The Rio Earth Summit in 92.
Oh, definitely. June 1992, Rio de Janeiro, the UN Conference on Environment and Development, UNCED. Yeah, the Earth Summit. That was huge.
Okay, let's unpack that. What was so significant about Rio? Why did it change things so much?
Well, Rio was more than just another conference. It was this fundamental shift in perspective, really. It forced the world to look hard at the link between the economy and the environment.
How so?
For the first time, issues like toxic stuff in gasoline, lead, radioactive chemicals, the need for alternative energy sources.
Moving away from fossil fuels.
Right. And boosting public transport to cut emissions, deal with city congestion, the fact that water was becoming scarce. All these things weren't just seen as environmental problems anymore.
Okay.
They were explicitly framed as critical to global development. It fundamentally tied environmental protection to sustainable economic progress. That was the new paradigm.
Wow. Okay, so it wasn't just about identifying problems, it was about designing global solutions.
Yep.
And some really key documents came out of that, didn't they? Foundational stuff.
Absolutely. You had 2 key non-binding documents first. The Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, that was quite short, 27 principles guiding sustainable development.
Okay.
And then Agenda 21.
Agenda 21.
Yeah.
That sounds ambitious.
It really was. A massive, comprehensive blueprint for action. For sustainable development right through the 21st century.
And who was supposed to implement it?
Everyone, basically. The idea was global, national, and local implementation. By the UN, by governments, by major groups. It even led to things like local Agenda 21 initiatives.
Right, bringing it down to the community level.
Exactly. And even more recently, there's been talk of an Agenda 21 for culture.
Interesting. But beyond those non-binding documents, Rio also gave birth to 2 really major legally binding agreements, right? The ones that set the course for decades.
That's right. The Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD, and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, Hugely important.
And the process didn't just stop in Rio. There were follow-ups.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You had Rio +5 in 97, the Johannesburg Summit in 2002, Rio +20 in 2012.
And what came out of those? Was progress smooth?
Well, at Rio +5, they actually acknowledged that progress had been uneven, which is, a pretty honest look at how hard this global cooperation stuff actually is.
Uneven. That sounds about right for international politics.
Yeah. But despite that, Rio +20, for instance, saw huge pledges. Over $513 billion committed to building a sustainable future.
Wow.
With a real focus on the green economy and improving international coordination. So it shows this long-term, evolving process. Sometimes challenging, yes, but ongoing. 3, diving deep into biodiversity, the CBD and its protocols.
Okay, let's zoom in on one of those key Rio agreements then. The Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD. What makes the CBD so foundational?
The CB really changed how we think about biodiversity. For the first time, it formally recognized that biodiversity isn't just, nice to have. It's a common concern of humankind.
A shared responsibility.
Exactly, and absolutely integral to the whole development process. Its main goals are pretty clear. First, conserve biological diversity. Second, use its components sustainably.
Okay, conservation and sustainable use.
And third, and this is where it gets really groundbreaking, the fair and equitable sharing of benefits that come from using genetic resources.
Benefits. What kind of benefits are we talking about?
It covers a lot. Things like getting appropriate access to the resources in the first place, technology transfer, funding, sharing royalties from discoveries, sharing research results.
So it's linking conservation directly to economic and social benefits.
Precisely. And recognizing those benefits need to be shared fairly. That was a major step.
Now, the CBD wasn't static. It's had additions, protocols added later, like the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. That sounds like it gets into some pretty cutting-edge territory, biotechnology.
It absolutely does. The Cartagena Protocol is all about ensuring safety in handling and transferring living modified organisms, LMOs.
LMOs, so genetically modified organisms.
Essentially, yes. Products of modern biotechnology, especially when they move across borders. The protocol's aim is to protect human health and the environment from any potential adverse effects.
How does it do that? Like, practically?
It set up procedures. The main one is the Advance Informed Agreement, or AIA. That's for LMOs that are going to be directly introduced into the environment, like modified seeds.
So countries have to agree beforehand.
Right. And there are also specific procedures for LMOs intended for direct use as food or animal feed, or for processing LMOs, FFP they call them.
Okay. And managing all this information.
There's a central system called the Biosafety Clearinghouse, the BCH. It's like an information hub.
And then building on Cartagena, there was another protocol. The Nagoya Kuala Lumpur one?
Yes, the Supplementary Protocol on Liability and Redress. That came later to strengthen Cartagena.
How did it strengthen it?
It basically added teeth. It specifies what response measures should be taken if damage to biodiversity does occur because of LMOs. And importantly, it assigns responsibility to the operator. It adds that layer of accountability.
Got it. And then there's another Nagoya Protocol, the one on access and benefit sharing, ABS.
That's right. This one links back directly to that third goal of the main CBD convention.
The fair and equitable sharing of benefits. So what does this Nagoya Protocol mean in practice for accessing genetic resources and sharing the benefits?
It's designed to provide a clear, transparent, legal framework for making that benefit sharing actually happen. It lays out core obligations for countries.
Like what?
Well, on the access side, countries providing genetic resources need to ensure legal certainty and clarity for users. Users need to get prior informed consent. It also encourages promoting research and thinking about emergencies or food security.
Okay, that's the access part. What about the benefit sharing?
On the benefit sharing side, it mandates sharing benefits fairly and equitably. And that includes both monetary benefits, like royalties, and non-monetary ones, like sharing research results or capacity building.
And how do they make sure this actually happens? Compliance.
Exactly. There are compliance obligations. Countries need to monitor how genetic resources are being used once they've left the country. And crucially, it addresses traditional knowledge associated with those resources.
The knowledge held by indigenous and local communities.
Precisely. It emphasizes needing their consent and ensuring they also share equitably in any benefits derived from their knowledge, which, raises that big question.
How do you make sure these complex legal rules actually translate into real benefits on the ground for everyone involved?
Yeah. That's the ongoing challenge.
Speaking of challenges, the CBD had that target back in 2002, didn't it? To significantly cut biodiversity loss by 2010.
It did. The biodiversity target,
And
it
unfortunately,
wasn't met, no. That failure was a pretty big wake-up call.
So what happened then? What was the response?
Well, that setback led directly to developing a new plan, the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020.
Okay.
And that plan included the Aichi biodiversity targets. They were adopted in 2010, actually, in Nagoya, Japan.
Ah, the Aichi targets. I've heard of those. Were they different?
Much more comprehensive. 20 targets organized under 5 strategic goals, A through E. They covered everything from addressing the underlying causes of biodiversity loss.
Like consumption patterns.
Exactly. To reducing the direct pressures, like habitat loss or pollution, then improving the actual status of biodiversity, enhancing the benefits we get from ecosystems.
And finally, boosting implementation through planning, funding, and capacity building. Goal E.
Right. It was a much broader, more integrated approach, learning from the failure of the 2010 target.
And was there also a push for more money? Because these things cost money. I remember COP11 in Hyderabad, India in 2012.
Yes, absolutely. A key outcome there was the commitment to double international financial flows, specifically for biodiversity by 2015.
Double them. To what level?
The target was around 30 billion US dollars. And India itself made what they call the Hyderabad Pledge of 50 million US dollars, signaling that commitment to invest. It highlighted that recognition. These ambitious goals need serious financial backing. 4. Protecting wetlands and controlling wildlife trade.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit now. From the broad biodiversity convention to specific ecosystems, the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands seems unique.
It is quite unique, yeah. It's the only global environmental treaty that focuses specifically on one particular type of ecosystem, wetlands.
And what's its mission? Why wetlands?
Its mission is the conservation and wise use of all wetlands. It recognizes just how incredibly valuable they are ecologically, economically, culturally. You name it.
So how does it work? What are the mechanisms?
It operates on what they call 3 pillars. First, promoting the wise use of all wetlands within a country's territory.
Wise use, meaning sustainable use.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
Maintaining their ecological character while allowing sustainable human use. The second pillar is designating suitable wetlands for the list of wetlands of international importance, the Ramsar list.
Okay, identifying the key sites globally.
Right. And the third pillar is international cooperation, especially regarding shared wetlands or shared species.
And I read about something called the Montreux Record.
Ah, yes. The Montreux Record is basically a register within the Ramsar framework. It lists Ramsar sites where adverse ecological changes have occurred, are occurring, or are likely to occur due to human interference.
So it's like a watch list for wetlands in trouble.
Exactly. It flags sites needing priority attention.
India's been involved with Ramsar for a while, right? Since 81?
Yes. India became a party in 1981 and currently has, I believe, 26 designated Ramsar sites.
And we see the Montreux Record in action there, too. Keoladeo National Park in Rajasthan and Loktak Lake in Manipur are on it now.
That's correct. They face specific ecological challenges.
But there's also a really positive story from India, isn't there? Chilika Lake.
Oh, the Chilika Lake example is fantastic. It's in Orissa. It was put on the Montreux Record back in 1993 because of serious problems with siltation, sedimentation, choking the lake.
Right. But it didn't stay there.
No. Thanks to some really significant rehabilitation efforts by the Chilika Development Authority and the state government, its ecological health improved dramatically, and it was removed from the Montreux Record in 2002. It's often cited as a major success story.
That's great to hear. And there was an interesting side note about solar power there, too.
Yeah, that's a newer development. The International Solar Alliance, the ISA, has actually been involved in promoting solar technology projects around Chilika, linking renewable energy to conservation efforts. Shows how different initiatives can connect.
Very cool. Okay, let's switch gears again to another major area, controlling the trade in wildlife. CITES.
Right. The Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, CITES, entered into force back in 1975.
And its focus is purely on the trade aspect.
Yes, it tackles the threat posed by unregulated international trade to the survival of wild animals and plants. Trade itself isn't banned entirely, but it's regulated to prevent overexploitation.
How does it do that? How does it decide which species need protection?
It works through a system of appendices. Species are listed in one of 3 appendices, and each appendix comes with a different level of regulation and requires specific permits for any trade.
Okay, 3 levels. What's Appendix 1?
Appendix I includes species threatened with extinction, These get the highest level of protection. Commercial trade in wild-taken specimens is basically prohibited. Think gorillas, sea turtles, giant pandas.
The most critically endangered.
Exactly. Then Appendix 2 is for species that aren't necessarily threatened with extinction right now, but they could become so if trade isn't strictly controlled. Trade is allowed, but requires permits ensuring it's sustainable and legal.
So, a step down in restriction, but still controlled.
Right. And Appendix 3 is a bit different. It lists species that are protected in at least one country, and that country has asked other CITES parties for help in controlling the trade. Examples might include certain map turtles or walruses, depending on the country request.
Okay, Appendices 3 and 3 makes sense. Now, with all this global trade happening, monitoring it must be a huge task. How does an organization like Traffic fit in?
Traffic is absolutely vital. It's the Wildlife Trade Monitoring Network.
Right.
It was actually set up in 1976, partly as a direct response to CITES coming into force. It's a joint program of WWF and IUCN, the World Wildlife Fund, and the International Union for Conservation of Nature.
So what does it do exactly? Monitor?
Yes, it's considered the world's largest wildlife trade monitoring program. It acts as a global expert on wildlife trade issues, investigating and analyzing trade trends, impacts, and routes.
And works with CITES.
Very closely. They collaborate with governments and the CITES Secretariat itself, providing information and analysis to help make CITES effective on the ground. Their whole goal is to ensure that trade in wild plants and animals doesn't threaten the conservation of nature.
It really brings home the reality of these threats when you hear about specific species, like that fact about the greater adjutant stork.
Ah, yeah. Critically endangered. A population may be only around 1,200 individuals left in the wild.
And most of them, like 80%, are just in Assam in India.
That's right. It really highlights how vulnerable some species are and how pressures from human development, habitat loss, and potentially trade can push them to the brink. It's exactly why CITES and monitoring bodies like Traffic are so incredibly crucial.
Wow. We've certainly covered a lot today. From the huge ambition of the Rio Summit through the complexities of biodiversity and biosafety, down to protecting specific places like wetlands and specific creatures through trade controls, it's a lot.
It really is. The sheer breadth of these efforts is quite something.
As you think back over all this incredible range of global efforts, what really stands out to you the most? Outro.
Reflecting on our conversation, we've really traced this arc, haven't we? From that foundational moment at the Rio Summit with its big, ambitious agendas.
Yeah, Agenda 21, the Rio Declaration.
Right through to these very focused, targeted conventions, protecting biodiversity with the CBD and its protocols, safeguarding vital ecosystems like wetlands under Ramsar, trying to control the often damaging trade in wildlife through CITES.
Mm-hmm.
It just powerfully underlines how complex and interconnected these global environmental challenges really are.
And I suppose the equally complex, collaborative, and sometimes difficult responses we've tried to build.
Absolutely. And we really hope this deep dive has given you, our listener, a much clearer picture of these international environmental efforts, maybe helped you grasp the sheer scale of the challenges.
Also the structures put in place to try and tackle them.
Exactly. It's that shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on a topic that, let's face it, affects every single one of us, giving you those valuable nuggets of knowledge.
And perhaps leaves us with something to think about. We talked about the immense effort, the legally binding nature of many of these agreements, but also the uneven progress, the failure to meet targets like the 2010 biodiversity target.
Yeah, that gap between intention and reality. So maybe the thought to ponder is, what does that gap really tell us? The gap between global intention and local impact. And looking ahead, what might be the real key to finally truly bridging that gap in the years to come?
A crucial question indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.